You know Reunion Tower, the big glowing ball on the Dallas skyline, that word, reunion. It's not just a nice name that somebody made up for a hotel district. It goes back to the 1850s when a group of French, Belgian, and Swiss settlers came to the bluffs of the Trinity River to build something almost impossible, a new society. They called it La Réunion. The idea was beautiful, a cooperative community, shared work, shared profits, a society built around harmony, culture, and the belief that people could start over if they organized life the right way. And for a moment, that dream landed right here on the western edge of what we now think of as Oak Cliff in West Dallas. But Texas is not a pamphlet. That land was harder than expected. The weather was brutal, the money started running out, and a lot of people who came to build an agricultural utopia were not farmers. They were watchmakers, shopkeepers, musicians, brewers, artists, intellectuals. They had brought instruments, ideas, and European culture to a frontier town, but they had not brought enough plows. Within a couple of years, the colony collapsed. The people did not simply vanish. Some left, some went home, some moved to New Orleans or San Antonio, but others stayed. And those former colonists helped shape early Dallas in ways most people never hear about, with schools, medicine, music, science, brewing, building materials, and public life. So the next time you see Reunion Tower glowing over downtown, remember that name reaches back to a failed French utopia on the Trinity. And one of Dallas's most recognizable landmarks is carrying the memory of a dream that did not survive, but somehow still left a mark.
Welcome to the Hidden City Podcast. I'm Grant.
And I'm Doug, and we're here to share some of the incredible stories and people from Oak Cliff that you might not know.
We're going to sit down with some of the visionaries, craftsmen, and business owners who have shaped Oak Cliff into what it is today.
Oak Cliff is on the south bank of the Trinity River, a few miles south of downtown Dallas. While technically it was part of Dallas, it was its own city for a long time, and it still has that independent spirit.
We'll dive into the history and the spirit of this place, exploring the different challenges and successes that defined it.
This is The Hidden City, a podcast about the people and the stories that make Oak Cliff extraordinary.
All of us know the word reunion because of the skyline. Reunion Tower, the Reunion District, Reunion Boulevard, and for a while, Reunion Arena. It feels like a downtown word now, a hotel word or a convention word. It's something that's connected to the Hyatt, the tower, the view, the lights. That name is older than all of that.
Long before the tower and long before the arena, long before Dallas looked like a city with a skyline, there was a colony on the bluffs above the Trinity River called La Réunion. And this story is one of the strangest and most interesting in Dallas history, because it begins in Europe with a political upheaval and a utopian philosophy. Then it moves to Texas, where a French thinker named Victor Considerant convinces people that North Texas could become the place to build a new kind of society. And then it lands here, just across the river from a young Dallas, on land that would eventually be absorbed into the modern city.
I love this part of the story because it sounds like something that belongs somewhere else. A French socialist colony, European artists, a dream of communal living, a place named La Réunion. You almost expect it to be in New Orleans or maybe somewhere along the East Coast, but no. This happened right here in Oak Cliff, on the Trinity, near the Chalky Bluffs, west of Oak Cliff. And in some ways, it's one of the earliest stories on this side of Dallas, shaping the city before Dallas fully knew what it would become.
Today, we want to tell the story of La Réunion, how a European dream came to North Texas, how the colony got its name, why it failed so quickly, what the settlers brought with them, and why the name still shows up in Dallas more than 170 years later.
To understand La Réunion, you have to start before anyone arrives in Dallas. You have to start in Europe with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era, where people were asking huge questions about society. Believe it or not, France had a major role in helping the United States win its independence. French money, French ships, French soldiers, and French officers helped America break free from the British crown during the Revolutionary War. But then France had to face its own question. What about us? If liberty and equality were worth fighting for across the ocean, what did that mean back home? So by the late 1700s and early 1800s, France had gone through political whiplash. King had been overthrown. Marie Antoinette had gone from Versailles to the guillotine. A republic had been declared. A revolution had promised liberty, equality, and a new kind of society. But then came violence, terror, empire, war, and eventually the return of kings. And so for a lot of people in France, the old order had been shattered, but the new world had not really delivered what it promised. Factories were changing work, cities were growing, poverty was still everywhere. Political revolutions kept rising and collapsing, and people were asking enormous questions. How should people work? Who should own property? Why do some people have so much while others have almost nothing? Can a community be organized in a way that removes poverty, conflict, and misery? Can you design a better life from the ground up? This is the world that produced people like Charles Fourier and Victor Considerant. They were not just trying to win an election or reform one law. They were asking whether society itself could be rebuilt. Fourier believed society could be reorganized around cooperative communities, people who would work together, share in the results, and live in a more harmonious arrangement than the industrial cities and political systems they had known.
One of Fourier's passionate followers was Victor Prosper Considerant. Considerant was not a random dreamer on the edges of a movement. He was one of the leading figures connected to Fourier's ideas. He was a writer, a political figure, and eventually an exile. After the political upheaval in France in the late 1840s and early 1850s, he began looking across the Atlantic. America looked open. Texas looked spacious. Land seemed available, and for someone trying to build a new social experiment, this combination was perfect.
Considerant traveled through the United States in the early 1850s, came through North Texas, and became convinced the area around the Trinity River could work. So he went back to Europe and wrote about Texas. And his writing became a kind of sales pitch. He described Texas as vast, fertile, and full of possibility. A place where land was available, the climate seemed favorable, and a new kind of society could be built without the weight of old European systems pressing down on it. To him, Texas was not just a destination. It was a blank page. Not everyone believed him, of course, but enough people did to cross an ocean.
One of the most interesting parts of the La Réunion story is that the colony was not originally supposed to be right here. Considerant had hoped for something much bigger. At one point, there was an interest in using an old Fort Worth site as a base for the colony. But by the time his people got to Texas to secure land, Fort Worth was no longer just an abandoned army post waiting to be claimed. Settlement had already moved in quickly. Land that may have seemed open for a few years earlier was suddenly harder to get.
So the agents kept looking, and eventually they found land on the south bank of the Trinity River across from Dallas. It had some of the things they wanted. There were bluffs above the floodplain, timber, meadows, and a river access. The land looked promising. And there was something about those chalky white bluffs that felt so familiar to some of the Europeans who came here. You can imagine the appeal. You leave Europe with a dream, you come to Texas, you see a bluff above a river, you see the open land, you see a small frontier town nearby. It may not have looked easy, but it looked possible.
And that is a key word for this whole story, possible. La Réunion was built on possibility. The possibility of a new social order, the possibility of starting over, the possibility of turning the Texas frontier into a cooperative community. But possibility can be a dangerous thing when it is stronger than the actual plan.
In 1855, the colonists began arriving. Many of them came through Galveston or Houston and then made the long trip north toward Dallas. And that journey alone should tell you how serious they were. This was not a quick move across town. They had to cross the Atlantic, they had landed on the Texas coast, and then they had to travel more than 200 miles inland with possessions carried by wagons and ox carts. Some hired haulers, some walked, and according to local accounts, some of them walked in wooden shoes, sabots, all the way to the place that they believed would become their new home.
When the new arrivals finally reached the colony, they were not stepping into a finished town. They were stepping into a beginning. There was an advanced group already there trying to prepare the site. They had picked the land, started the rough work, and waited for the larger wave of colonists to arrive from Europe. And then they came. Families, workers, idealists, French, Belgium, and Swiss settlers who had crossed the Atlantic, landed on the Texas coast, and made the long, difficult journey inland towards Dallas. By the time they reached the bluffs above the Trinity, the moment itself carried meaning. This was not just an arrival, it was a reunion, a La Réunion. That is what the name means. Before it was a failed colony, before it became a historical marker, before the name ended up as a tower downtown, it was a gathering of people who believed they were meeting at the start of something new. People from Europe rejoining the small group already in Texas, families coming back together, workers and dreamers standing on the edge of a frontier town, looking at the land and imagining that it could be a place where the new society would begin. That is the beauty of the name. It's not just branding, it was a moment.
And Dallas noticed the town was small then, rough, young, still trying to decide what it was going to be. So when these Europeans arrived with their language, their clothing, their instruments, their politics, their customs, all of their ambition, it must have been quite an event. Local accounts say Dallas citizens even treated their arrival like a holiday. That's a pretty cool image to sit with for a moment. A little frontier town across the river, watching a group of French-speaking Europeans arrive to build a utopia town. That is Dallas before Dallas becomes Dallas. And La Réunion is right there in the frame.
The colony was meant to be cooperative. The idea was that people would share in the profits according to their investment and their labor. Considerant wanted a community governed more directly by the people living in it, with work and reward organized in a more balanced way. This was not supposed to be every man for themselves on the frontier. It was supposed to be a planned society, a community with shared purpose.
But the people who came here were not helpless. They brought real skills with them. But many of those skills belong more to the world they had left behind than to the frontier they had just entered. They were artisans, shopkeepers, watchmakers, weavers, brewers, musicians, and educated professionals. They knew how to make things, repair things, teach, organize, trade, and even bring culture into a place. And for a young town like Dallas, that was important. La Réunion had a general store. It had a school, it had music, dancing, singing, and social life. The settlers even brought instruments with them, including an organ and a piano. So this was not just a group of people trying to plant crops. They were trying to plant a civilization. That is part of what makes the story so fascinating to me. La Réunion failed as a farming colony, but it was also the arrival of so much culturally. These settlers brought Dallas a kind of European skill, learning and artistic life that the young frontier town did not have really much of any yet.
That is one reason the story has a strange afterlife. If you measure La Réunion only by whether the colony survived as a colony, then it failed. But if you measure it whether the settlers changed the place around them, the answer gets more complicated because the colony collapsed quickly. But the people brought knowledge, trades, and culture into early Dallas. And when some of those people stayed, those things they were working on began working their way into the city.
The problem started almost immediately. Some were practical. The first major group arrived late in the growing season. That made farming difficult from the very beginning. The land was not as easy to farm as they had hoped. And this is really, really important. The soil and limestone bluffs that looked beautiful were not necessarily suited to the crops they wanted to grow. Then came weather, severe winters, summer drought, heat, grasshoppers. There's one detail that almost sounds made up, but it gets at the whole problem. In May of 1856, a blizzard hit. In Texas, in May. It destroyed the crops, and it reportedly left ice on the Trinity River. Then, as if that were not enough, the summer brought drought and heat, and grasshoppers ate whatever was left. So within a year, the colony had seen both extremes. Freezing weather when they needed crops to survive, and then a punishing Texas summer that finished the job. A brutal frontier environment that did not care about anyone's theory or social harmony.
Then there was the human problem. A lot of the colonists were not experienced farmers. That is one of the great ironies of this story. They came to build an agricultural community, but many of them were better suited for shops, trades, music, learning, and city life than breaking Texas soil. You can almost see the disconnect. The pamphlet version of Texas had room for vineyards, gardens, and a harmonious labor. The real version had heat, bad soil, hard work, insects, illness, and disappointment.
And on top of it all, there were money problems. The company behind the colony did not raise enough capital to make the project stable. Prices in Texas were rising, housing was inadequate, there was internal conflict, there was a lot of disagreement with the leadership. And Considerant himself became a source of frustration. Some accounts say he was disappointed with the site and began looking elsewhere, even imagining a different colony farther west. So while the settlers were trying to hold the place together, the founders' confidence in the place seemed to have been slipping.
That is a hard thing for any community to survive. Bad crops are one thing, heat is one thing, a shortage of money is one thing, but when the dream itself starts to lose confidence of the person who sold it, then the whole project gets fragile. By 1857, La Réunion was effectively finished as a serious communal experiment. It had lasted around 18 months as an organized colony, and that is the part of the story that feels almost unbelievable. Preparation took years. The sails pitch crossed an ocean. The settlers came hundreds and thousands of miles. The name became part of the map. And then, almost as quickly as it began, the colony was dissolving.
Some settlers went back to Europe. Some moved to New Orleans. Some went to San Antonio. Others stayed in Dallas or elsewhere here in Texas. And that's where the story kind of starts changing. Because La Réunion, the colony, failed. But La Réunion, the people, kept moving. They carried their skills into Dallas. They entered civic life, opened businesses, and they even practiced medicine here in the city. They studied plants. They helped build schools. They shaped the early culture of the city. And that's why this is more than a utopia failed story. That part is true, but there's more to it than that.
The dream failed in one form and scattered into another. That might be the most Dallas thing about it. The grand ideal did not survive, but the practical skills did. The people did, the influence did. Some of the names connected to La Réunion still echo around Dallas. Julian Reverchon became one of the most important naturalists and botanists in the region. Reverchon Park and Reverchon Drive carry his name. Benjamin Long, a Swiss colonist, became a significant civic figure and served as a mayor of Dallas. Former colonists were connected to some of the city's earliest institutions and businesses. There are accounts tying La Réunion settlers to Dallas's first brewery and the first butcher shop. Other contributions to medicine, education, architecture, and the study of Texas plants.
And then there was the land itself. In later years, the old colony area became tied to limestone, clay, brick, and cement. The bluffs that had helped attract the settlers became useful in another way. The dream of a cooperative agricultural community did not take root there, but the raw material under their feet eventually helped feed a building industry, which is kind of a strange turn. They came looking for the ground that would support a utopia, and what that ground offered Dallas instead was stone, lime, clay, and material for a growing city.
And if you want to see traces of La Réunion today, there are still a few places to look. There's a historical marker at Stevens Park Golf Course near T number 6. There's a La Réunion Cemetery, also known as Fish Trap Cemetery, in West Dallas. There are street names like Victor and Contregraul, tied to Victor Considerante and Francois Contregraul. And there's one trace that is not carved into stone or printed on a street sign. Every July, the neighborhood of Oak Cliff celebrates Bastille Day in Bishop Arts. That's not random either. Bastille on Bishop is Oak Cliff remembering its French roots in the most Oak Cliff way possible, with people walking the streets, wine glasses in hands, baguettes on shoulders, shops open, music playing, and the whole neighborhood turning into a summer street party. So in a strange way, La Réunion still gathers people, not as a colony, as a celebration. And then, of course, there's the big one, Réunion Tower.
For a long time, the La Réunion story was an easy one to miss. The colony was gone, the buildings disappeared, the city grew over the landscape. Dallas became focused on newer stories, bigger stories, and shinier things. Then in the 1970s, as the Réunion development was taking shape downtown, the name came back. The developers could have chosen something generic, and apparently a name like Esplanade was floated, which feels very 1970s and very forgettable. But John Scoville, working on the project for Ray Hunt, dug into local history and found the La Réunion story. The name had layers. It connected to the old colony. It sounded welcoming. It suggested people gathering, and it worked for a hotel district. It carried a piece of Dallas history forward, and that's maybe the most important part.
That is why Réunion Tower is such a strange monument. Nothing about it feels like a relic of the 1850s. It does not look French. It does not look agricultural. It does not look like a monument to a failed socialist colony on the Trinity River. It looks like Dallas imagining the future, a glowing ball in the skyline. But the name reaches backwards. It points to a settlement that failed before Dallas had become a major city. To people who came here with enormous hope, beautiful ideas, and not nearly enough practical support. To a time when the Trinity River still marked the edge of the known world for young Dallas. So Réunion Tower ends up doing something kind of unusual. It looks futuristic, but it carries one of the city's oldest dreams.
And that is what makes this name so good. Because the tower does not explain the story, it just keeps the door cracked open. You see the word reunion, and if you know the story and the history, the skyline changes a little. That glowing ball downtown is also a marker for a vanished colony, a failed experiment, a dream that left almost nothing standing, but somehow kept its name in the city's mouth.
Now, depending on who is telling the story, La Reunion gets described as West Dallas, far west Oak Cliff, or the south bank of the Trinity River near what became the modern city. And that can get confusing. But for our purposes, the important thing is this. La Reunion belongs to the history of the western edge of Oak Cliff in the Trinity River world that shaped early Dallas. It is across from Dallas. It was on the bluffs. It was part of the larger geography south and west of the river where so many Dallas dreams either took shape or fell apart.
This really is a hidden piece of history in Oak Cliff, hiding in plain sight. This is exactly the kind of story people drive by without seeing. You can play golf at Stevens Park and miss the marker. You can pass Reunion Boulevard and never wonder where that name came from. You can even look at Reunion Tower 1,000 times and assume the word is just branding. But the story underneath it is older, stranger, and deeply human.
And it also says something about Oak Cliff in this side of the river. So many Dallas stories begin with someone looking across the Trinity, imagining something, a neighborhood, a rail line, a port, a utopia, a place to start over. And some of those dreams worked, some failed and still changed the city. La Reunion belongs in that last category.
The story of La Reunion is easy to tell as a failure. A group of Europeans came to Texas to build a perfect society, but the land was wrong. The weather was wrong. The leadership faltered. The money ran out. The colony dissolved. All of that is true. But the local version of this is richer than that, I think. Because these were not just failed settlers. They were people who brought culture and music, trades, science and medicine, brewing, education and public life into a young, still forming Dallas. They came to build one type of community. And when that did not work, some of them helped build another one.
That is the part worth remembering. La Reunion did not become what its founders promised, but became part of what Dallas inherited. A short-lived colony became a cemetery, a marker, a few street names, a set of family histories, and eventually one of the most recognizable names in the skyline.
So the next time you see Reunion Tower, I want you to think of this. Think of the people who came before the tower, before the arena, before the district, before the skyline. Think of those wooden shoes on a long Texas road walking 200 miles. Think of a piano and an organ arriving on the frontier. Think of artists and the people that were trying to become farmers on this limestone soil. Think of the French dream landing here on the banks of the Trinity and breaking apart in the Texas heat. And then remember that some dreams fail cleanly, others fail and leave roots. And La Reunion was one of those. The colony disappeared, but the name stayed. And Dallas is still saying it.
All right, dude. La Reunion. That was quite the story. That's like one of those histories that I feel like we grew up in Dallas, never knew about it.
Yep.
Lived in Oak Cliff for a while and still didn't know about it. And then it was the French festival, the Bastille and Bishop. It's kind of like my first introduction to it.
Yeah, I think the French Bastille and Bishop festival, if you start to wonder why that happens, you hear the story of La Reunion and it becomes, such an incredible story to unlock and think about, because those were basically the earliest Oak Cliff people. Though it wasn't Oak Cliff in name, it was they were here first.
Also, how Oak Cliff,
or at least early on,
are these types of people? Like I'm like
totally
the craftsmen, the artists, the socialists. I'm just like I'm like not necessarily your like 90s Dallas businadmen that are like, hey, I'm doing this for oil and whatever.
It's
like,
a little bohemian almost. I feel like that's. I had never left. I mean, that's what you get a lot of that in Oak Cliff, and I think it's
organs, art. I love it. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I love learning all that.
The story of them walking from Houston to Dallas, 200 miles in wooden shoes, to me is just absolutely mind blowing. And also that they like dragged an organ. Organ
pianos and all that.
It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean. We obviously are involved in the Oak Cliff Brewery, and so learning that I think it's Monil was his name, or I think
Monil,
something like that.
Yeah.
But that the first brewer of Dallas was from our neighborhood is like so cool.
We
can't wait
that.
to build one of those beers someday or something.
We need to go find his old beer recipes and see if we can recreate them or something. Some sort of French saison, I'm sure, out there. But I mean the amount of impact I think these people had on Dallas. When you think about it too, they're looking at a frontier town on the other side of the river. So it's not really Dallas as we think about it today. And they're doing their own thing over here, trying to experiment.
Old world Europe. kind of like. I loved going through the French history part of this episode too, where you're like, oh yeah, there's so much occurring with like France. I mean, France even owned Texas for a while. You know, like there's parts of it is like we forget it was under French rule. There's connections.
There's some real.
It's one of our Six Flags, right?
That's right. I was really lucky to visit France not long ago, and there's an actual embassy to Texas.
Yeah.
That was there when Texas was its own republic, and so, and just that idea that there's a shared history and effort in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, that's
where France was deeply involved in the U.S.'s independence, and so, I think it's kind of fun to think about how they sold Texas and like how that was sold to people in Europe.
Sure. Yeah,
and then they got here, and it's like. They had a blizzard in May and then a summer heat. Like that kind of thing is so Texas.
What would have it looked like if they didn't have the blizzard and scorching summer that year? Like you're like, oh, that would have been really interesting to have a utopian society. I mean, they all fail, right? But like, but it would have been interesting if they didn't get hit with such harsh weather.
I think is what.
You're unlucky.
It's
you're unlucky
18 months in. It's like you get that and you're done. Yeah. But it's a part of the trail of stories in Oak Cliff of people coming here and trying to do something new. You think of the other early developers and their ideas and their ambition. And it's just funny to think about how Oak Cliff has so much of that kind of history.
Well, when you read some of the descriptions, I think that was just amazing. I did get, I forget the work of art that they have, but they have like graphs of like, I should have brought it. Fourier's work kind of describing Texas.
Whoa.
And I'll bring it to the office or Wax Space.
Yeah.
But the way they talk about Oak Cliff being French in Europe, like they like are relating so much. They're like, no, this is Europe. We're in this beautiful like place. And you're like, yes, but it's like not totally the same. There's
Correct.
beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, Oak Cliff is way more beautiful than most of Dallas. It has those hills. It has some of that.
Yeah.
But I just found it so interesting how they were describing this as outside of Paris.
Yes.
Exactly.
No, it's it's an interesting story, but enjoyed getting to dig into it with you, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Hidden City. We hope you discovered something about Oak Cliff that you didn't know. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you subscribe to it on YouTube and then follow us on any of the podcasting platforms. Also, if you enjoyed it, please share with a friend, and thanks so much for tuning in.